So we're very glad to have a really interesting panel discussion ahead in front of us. And without much further ado, I'd like to hand over the stage to Professor Madhavan Mukund, who's again an old friend of MSR, also Dean of CMI, and also Dean of ACM India Research Board. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Satish. So as you would have seen, the title of this panel is Cybersecurity, National Policy and Preparedness. So we have two very well-qualified people to talk to us. To my left is Mr. Narendranath, who's Joint Secretary of the National Center for Security Coordination, NCSC. And we have, not.
It's called the National Security Council Secretariat.
And we have Subrata Rakshit, who is the Associate Director of the Center for AI and Robotics, DRDO in Bangalore. So the way we will structure this is that we have asked both the speakers to initially talk to us for about 10 to 15 minutes about their ideas about this topic. And then we will have a combination of some questions from me or from the audience. So as I've warned them, this is a topic on which anybody who's not an expert has a lot of questions. So they should be prepared for a lot of wide-ranging questions from, it's a very broad scope also. So over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And a good morning to all of you. So I work in the what's called the, just a little bit of the organization. How many of you know about the NSCS? Yeah, you have one person. So that's a good percentage. So I think there's something called the National Security Council, and it's headed by the Prime Minister. And that National Security Council looks after both all aspects of security, national security. Internally, it looks internally, it looks externally. It looks all the technological aspects, the political aspects, the economical aspects. It's a complete range of security issues are looked after. And that National Security Council is assisted by this National Security Council Secretariat. And the National Security Advisor is part of the National Security Council Secretariat. So currently Mr. Ajit Doval is the National Security Advisor in the country. So there, we have got different verticals looking after different aspects of national security, and I personally look after the cyber security issues. We have the National Security Council, the NSA is assisted by 3 deputy NSAs. There was some reorganization that happened in October, and we have a vertical looking after technology and intelligence, a vertical looking after strategic affairs, and a vertical looking after internal affairs. And we also have an office of the National Cyber Security Coordinator that was created for 4 years back. We didn't have an office of the National Cyber Security Coordinator, and that office of the National Cyber Security Coordinator was created, and we have a NCSC, National Cyber Security Coordinator, who functions out of the National Security Council Secretariat. I'm part of that setup. We had Dr. Gulshan Rai as the first National Cyber Security Coordinator, who was there for 3 years, and currently since April of this year, last year 2019, we have Lieutenant General retired Pant, Rajesh Pant, who was originally from Signals of the Army, who is the current National Cyber Security Coordinator. So I hope that's some information to people. When you're talking of cyber security, I think we should have an idea that we have a national coordinator who looks after the coordination activities in the country. Now the word there, word there to be looked at is coordinator. So we have, it's not that before we had this office of NCSC, we didn't have any cyber security apparatus in the country. We did have. And we find at the nodal level, you could say the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, in addition to looking at Digital India and the digitization of different services and sectors, was also looking after the cyber security aspects. We have what is called the CERT India, Computer Emergency Response Team India, which is part of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. That actually coordinates with various sectors for doing for threat analysis, getting threat feeds, and then providing incident response, and also issues advisories to different sectors. They also assist organizations, whenever there is an incident, they provide technical expertise to actually, they send out people to assist that organization in tackling that cybersecurity incident. In addition to that, we have this institution created under the IT Act of 2000, subsequently amended in 2008, called the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. So, how many of you have heard of the NCIIPC? Okay, yes sir, thank you. So, it's not that the cyberspace is vast, it covers all sectors, but critical information, critical infrastructure. Once we have one thing called the critical infrastructure, and the other is the CII, the critical information infrastructure. So, if for example, railway line could be a critical infrastructure, and something breaks down or a bridge is there, you have loss of communication across that. But within the railway system, all the IT infrastructure is not critical information infrastructure. There would be certain critical information infrastructure, the compromise of which would lead to, you could say, disastrous consequences for the transportation system. So, when you look at putting security systems in place and working with security of those IT systems, there would be specific measures, extra measures that would be required to see that your CII that is there in that critical infrastructure is protected. So, the national critical, while CERT looks after the complete cyberspace and considering the size of the team, the size of the country, and the different sectors in which ICT infrastructure is there, they have too much on their plate for them to be focused on the specific measures that are required to take place in the critical information infrastructure. So, the NCIIPC is tasked with that job, that they do not look at all the clutter that is there, they actually focus on, one of the first things they do is they first identify critical infrastructure and the critical information infrastructure within that. That is one first job that they do, and then work with these sectors to find out exactly what is required to be done to secure the critical information infrastructure of the country. The Act also provides, one of the things about that is that you attack an ICT infrastructure, there are some penal clauses that are there and you could be penalized, and you attack a critical information infrastructure, there are separate penal clauses. That is, you have higher level of penalty that is there. So, that is one distinguishing feature, that if somebody targets and then attribution happens and the person is picked up, then the amount of sentence, the amount of time he was put in a jail is substantially more than what would happen if he was attacking a normal ICT infrastructure. So, that is one thing that happens. So, these are things, and one of the things, we also have this cyber security policy of 2013. So, it was quite a comprehensive, it's quite a comprehensive document that addressed the complete spectrum of cyber security issues, right from institutional infrastructure to audits, training of capacity building within the country, testing. So, you find that it covered all of that. In that there were no specific targets as such, in the sense that there is a wish list of saying that this is should be done, except for one particular target was that over a period of 5 years we would have around 500,000 cybersecurity professionals who would be developed in the country. Now, that is a target that really could not be achieved. And other thing is, another observation is that across the sectors you will find that sectorally people, the organizations, individual organizations, and sectorally the sectoral regulators have taken measures for cyber security. But the level of maturity is not uniform across all the sectors. Like the BFSI, for example, is much more mature than most other sectors in terms of securing the cyber infrastructure. The telecom sector is much more mature than other sectors in terms of securing the cyber infrastructure. The same could not be said, for example, of, let us say, the power sector, the transportation sector to a certain extent. And let's say the medical the sector. So, you find that if you the level of the number of controls that they put in place, the amount of infrastructure that's gone into the for cyber security is varied across, and you'll also find the level of expertise of the persons who are manning it is also there. The organizational structure within the organizations of for ensuring cyber security, that is also varied, and within the government departments also you'll find that the maturity level is different. You have many places you will find that because there are some mandates that come around that you should have a CISO, and there's a hammering that happens. So, somebody is nominated as a CISO in an organization. But you would find that person, for example, if it's a department or organization deals with horticulture or agriculture, you would find a person who's actually well versed in maintaining apple orchards, who would actually be the CISO of that organization, because it's a job that he will do for some time before he's assigned some other role. But the other person who comes in his place is another person who's been much more versed in pesticides or fertilizers than in cyber security. So, that is one thing, that observation. So, you'll find that, but it's not the case across. I mean, you'll find that for in the BFSI sector, you really meet some of the CISOs, they are so well versed, they have a thorough knowledge of the systems that they are deploying, they have complete visibility, and they're focused on their job. So, these are some of the things you observe. So, recently last year we started sometime, I think May, June, we started with thinking that let's have review, because 2013 is quite some time back. Let's have a complete review of all the aspects that are there, and then come up with a strategy which is having specific targets and specific time frame. Like the 2013 policy did not talk of any time frame, it's just a policy that came about. But now we said let's have a 5-year horizon and 2020 to 2025 and have a strategy for that with measurable outcomes of what we want to do. So, that is a work in progress. January 10th, initially December 31st was the last date for public consultation where we asked for inputs, and January 10th then it was extended because of that festive season. We had lots of requests, and we have received more than 250 submissions through the portal that we had created. Prior to that creation of the portal, we had weekly Friday meetings we used to have. We had people from industry, academia, the government, the different departments coming and giving their own presentations about what they look at should be the strategy for the country. So, those were 1:1 interaction. We have created a task force, inter-organizational task force, and that task force is working on this. And these different organizations, including like FICCI and SHM and individual cyber security experts and like Ministry of Finance. So, all of them have come and given presentations. Now, the work is going on in actually fleshing it out and working on that, and hopefully maybe in the next few months we should come up with the draft document which we will share with for comments and later on finalize it. So, this is one I want to take, and some of the challenges that observation that we have got is like we have been having instances of breaches, and some are high profile breaches also that have occurred, which have come out in the papers and all. And whenever we looked at, especially in the bank sector for example, some breaches have occurred a couple of years back and the last year also. We go there and see it, we find that a security audit had taken place a month or a month and a half back or a couple of months back. And when you go into the breach, you find that infection, that malicious activity was there in the system for the last 2 years. And 2 security audits have taken place prior to that. So, there is something wrong that the system, that though we have a system for empaneling of security auditors, there is a system by certain where security auditors are empaneled, and we have this private security auditors who come and do the security audit. But it's not really that those audits are not really catching, they are not catching those infections which are already prevalent in the system, and they've been active there. So, that is one issue that we had found. So, how do you strengthen the security audit mechanism in the country? The other is, as I pointed out regarding the CISO, is that we should have some maybe a mandate saying that CISO should have basic minimum technical qualifications and experience of certain years in a domain and domain knowledge before he becomes the CISO. And of course, there are challenges to that in terms of, the growth of the individual. Now, you have a very small team that looks after security, and how does that person grow in the organization? He stagnates. He joins in the first day as a CISO, and then he stagnates there. So how do you create this structure? Both, I don't know. One thing is in the government, for example, how do you create a structure so that we have all of this? And we have this financial audits that take place. Do we make it, and there are statutory audits that are there. The C&AG is there for the Comptroller Auditor General who actually looks after that. Do we create an institutional mechanism for, so like we have in the financial audits? Now, like finance is something that's a common denominator across all organizations. Something like that, cyber is something that's now a common denominator of all organizations. So some organizational structures and mandates that we have in the financial sector, should that be replicated in, for example, the cyberspace? So that we have similar sort of learnings that we have there, similar type of audit structures and all, should it be coming. We have had some preliminary discussions from the C&AG to see if that organization can be strengthened or created a separate vertical created within them to undertake this responsibility of conducting cybersecurity audits with appropriate domain knowledge personnel recruited specifically. Because the current domain knowledge specifics are people with auditing and accounting knowledge that are there. So that is one area maybe that could be addressed. The other some of the other challenges is let's say, for example, bulk of the ICT equipment and infrastructure that goes into our networks in any sector is imported, and some of the equipment gets imported from countries of concern also, and we have issues that how do you ensure that this infrastructure is secure? Is there a mechanism by which you could test? I mean, one is the source of supply. When you talk of secure infrastructure, one we look at is the assurance, this level of assurance about the source of supply. But that itself does not. That is one thing. How do you that itself does not guarantee that your infrastructure is secure, because lots of breaches, for example, in the Western world that you see every other day that get reported, and you look at the ICT infrastructure that's underlying, you would see that most of that ICT infrastructure is sourced from those countries. So just because they have had an assurance that the underlying hardware and software is not come from countries of concern, has not given them, it has not prevented breaches from occurring. So when you look at that assurance about the infrastructure that gets in, one is having a assured source of supply with respect to intent. The other is regarding the quality of the architecture and design of the infrastructure. So these are two things. So how do you have a mechanism in place that we could have a certification or a testing regime that be there, which looks at the hardware part of it, the operating system level, the applications level? How do you get into that place? And there are challenges there. I mean, there's a path down which especially the telecom sector has walked for quite some time with some licensing conditions for the service providers to actually have certified equipment going into networks. That's a good statement, motherhood statement, to say that the network equipment should be certified before it gets into the networks. But having a certification mechanism itself is a challenge. We have a common criteria mechanism, it's a very elaborate process. But that doesn't actually, the problem with there is, it's a vendor claim that is only verified and certified. Now, is that vendor claim of the security, is it sufficient requirement for ensuring security of the equipment? He says, I've got certain features, I verify that and I give a certificate. But but somebody has to say, the requirements that he has put in are sufficient requirements. So how do you come up with a national security requirements for each sector or for each deployment, and then say these are the requirements against which that should be certified, and is a work that has to be done in that direction. So that is another area, we have certification and all. Yeah, sorry. So that's what you just tell me 5 minutes. So there are certain, I think subsequently we will take up other things. So these are some of the thoughts that are there, and we are here and we will take it further. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Subrata to give us his thoughts.
So you just heard from somebody who is deeply involved in the policy making space. I work in the Ministry of Defense, so some of the activities in my lab get into the cyber security space. So I'm here more from the technical perspective as far as the official status is concerned. Having been in the government for a lot of time, I also get to see the government efforts from inside the government, and very often I find that some of those are not getting necessarily interpreted or appreciated right. So for those discussions with PJ, and I have to thank that he decided to put me here, but not as in an organizational capacity of any policy making. So first of all, when it comes to how prepared are we, or what is it that we can do? See, security in general and cyber security specifically for Ministry of Defense is a well studied and well provisioned thing. So there is capabilities in terms of construction, there is capabilities in terms of analysis, there is capabilities in terms of certification. Now the standard used for Ministry of Defense is actually quite high, because at that point it's one sovereign state fighting off against another sovereign state with no holds barred. So you can't amortize risk, you can't use insurance as a backup or anything like that. So they have very exacting standards of effectively not saying you have got enough security features, but are you in a position to assure that certain property will necessarily hold. So that requires a very rigorous analytic definition of what your problem is. So it's like a waterfall model. You first decide that this is my asset. Then you decide that for that asset I want these properties to hold good, whether it is confidentiality or availability or integrity, so on and so forth. Then you see that in that case what are the solutions I have. Then if I want to say that yes, I need integrity here or I need confidentiality there, then you look at the various mechanisms for implementing and the implementation itself. Now it turns out that in this entire chain, the cryptography is perhaps the least of our problems, in the sense that we do have a very good cryptographic community within the country. The talent pool that comes and becomes available is pretty good, and that part of it is fine. The bigger problems end up being things like, now that I have got a cryptography as a mathematical solution, now I need to have an implementation of it. The minute it comes to that implementation, if you want an assurance, rather than saying, oh look, I did my job and I did cryptography. Now the question is, could it have been bypassed? Could it have been Trojan? Is the overall system design adequate, or has it left a window open somewhere? Those are the parts which make it very difficult to do. And the certification process becomes an extremely excruciating process. It takes a lot of manpower, and therefore the designs also need a lot of revisions. So that is why those of you who would have had some exposure to submitting things for defense and the so-called grading process and certification process would have known that it is a very, and they will ask questions which otherwise you would not have heard anybody answering. At that point, as was brought out, we don't have a lot of the hardware boxes. We don't even have ownership of a lot of the software components. If you are doing a certification, what all would you need to check? You would need to check that the problem has been correctly identified and everything required for that problem is actually there. So that is the completeness part of it. Then you will need the correctness part of it, that if that is what you intended to do, did you do it correctly, or is there some way of breaking it from somewhere, or some other bypass method is available. Finally, as a sovereign to sovereign, you have to also worry that if that box is doing what it is claiming to do, I hope it's not doing anything else. Now that anything else is a hideously difficult problem to answer with respect to the modern ICT equipment, both at the hardware level and at the software level. Once upon a time, we had recourse to the famous AIR gap. I mean, today AIR is the broadband. So if you are now going to start seeing ghosts like, oh, is there a wireless transmitter sitting somewhere in the box? Maybe that is disconnected from the LED which is supposed to tell me when the Wi-Fi is on. These are extremely difficult questions to answer. So therefore, the solutions which come up in the defense end up being very stiff, in the sense that they take years to certify. They might restrict the functionality offered, and they might stay away from certain large big black box components. That was still for MOD. Now what we are, and there is a certain vocabulary which goes with it. So you have this concept of a red, purple and black. So a purple component is something which can be verified to be correct. It can be shown to be immune to attacks, and therefore that is the basis of your security. Then there will be some parts of your ICT system which is not undergone all of that, but which is safely sitting behind the purple. So you say, yes, that has vulnerabilities put in, but it is typically to be assumed in a trusted state and to be used by the good guys. And there is part of your system which is thrown to the wolves, is accessible by adversary, and that's the black component. Now the name of the game is that if you want security, then the policy you want implemented on your assets should be dependent on the red and the purple. It cannot be dependent on the black side components, because that could potentially have been taken over by that adversary. Now the purple has to be so positioned as to create enough black. You might say, why don't we have everything as purple? Even the MOD is not rich enough to have everything as purple. We have to have some reds sitting behind the purples. Then there is this question of, now this is getting technical, but there is a data plane, a control plane, and a management plane. So the data is of course the information part that is getting exchanged. Then there are those components which are actually processing that information. That's the control plane elements. But those are not fixed functionalities. You might want to configure them in various ways. So there is a management plane. Now you cannot possibly say that the data is going to come only from trusted sources, because the minute you have a military system, it is supposed to be open and sensing that adversary and getting things back. Various things will happen, and so practically speaking, you have to assume that some of the data will originate in the black and come. So then the name of the game is to make sure that the control plane cannot possibly get affected in processing that data plane. So you need to have your control plane which effectively would amount all your scripts, your binaries and utilities to be not changing their state thanks to the data, changing their behavior thanks to the data. Now that's a very difficult design to pull off, which is why most of your mainstream operating systems would never pass those evaluation, but that's still a problem. Now when it comes to cyber, see, when it came to the physical Army, Navy, Air Force defending the land, the air and the sea, those are physical spaces. In the physical space, there was a well demarcated boundary. So you had your Army, Navy, Air Force defending that boundary, and they had special equipment, they had special legal provisions, and therefore you invoke the sovereign status of the government to say yes, they can shoot to kill, so on and so forth. The rest of the country was sitting behind that. So you had a much lesser standard there, you had no great command control hierarchies there, you had a lot of liberties and everything else going. So the military policy of a country and the civilian facing homeland policies of a country, whether it is India, Germany, UK, US, these are poles apart. Now comes cyberspace, where you don't really have that demarcated boundary, it's fractal. Practically any computer in any boardroom or bedroom connected to the internet is part of your international boundary as far as cyberspace is concerned. So we are going to have a huge challenge in delivering the standard nation to nation kind of security that we would expect otherwise in the cyberspace, and so some compromises will get made. Further, the nature of cyberspace is very different from the others, that rest of them are more or less fixed. Forget Alexander going on a conquest. These days everybody is defending a fixed thing, give or take a couple of mountain ranges, but pretty much it is a fixed thing. Cyberspace is exactly different. It is growing. It is not the case that if today you have said 2 million servers in the Indian cyberspace, then 2 million is what he has to defend and that's the end of his responsibility. No. The expectation is today 2 million, tomorrow 4 million, after that 1 billion. So when we talk in terms of security in cyberspace, you need to secure the growth, not just where we are today. If you want to do that, you cannot now, for defending what we have today, come up with a policy so stringent that it blocks the growth itself. So many of these things, even at a game theoretic level, are not resolved issues. So yes, we can all go and make a submission to him, but all I am saying is that appreciate the fact that its answers are not going to be that easy. The game theoretic models to say what should be the trade-off between allowing growth and accepting a certain vulnerability today, such that the overall utility function is maximized, is a different problem. And of course, that is where academia rises to the occasion. Now, one more caveat to give is that initially when we were doing cybersecurity, as always happens, we were doing an automation of an existing business logic. That's how every computer penetration happens. So we had a whole lot of information on files. We said, fine, this is where we go and put it on the disk. So the issue was data. So if you look at the 60s and 70s classic cyber security literature, it was all about the data. And the good thing was, from the government side, the military perspective, there existed a vocabulary. Unclass, restricted, confidential, secret, top secret. And that got into the literature as well. So you had multi-level security and everything else, but it was looking primarily at confidentiality and primarily at data. The reality is, you have confidentiality, integrity, availability, and a whole bunch of other things subsequently came up, but at least I'm sure most of you are available with the CIA model. You can add validities and authentications and everything else if you want. What is more, today, the issue is not just the data, the issue is also the fact that cyberspace is dear to us because of the services it provides, because of the connectivities it provides, because it is a space in which we go and do things in our lives. So if you had to ask the younger generation today, their attachment to cyberspace is qualitatively different from what it was, say, a generation or two back. And to them, it is not just data, it is a whole bunch of services that are coming in. Now, the academic models for having those kinds of conversations don't even exist. So people will simply say that yes, there is multi-level security, but you come back to the same classification business. Then you assume that integrity and availability will also map to that. You assume that so long as data is what it is, the rest of it I don't have a vocabulary for. But in practice, the breaches as he was talking about are breaches which have happened not because somebody has violated classification primarily, but because the control plane, the executables, the operating systems, these are getting hit. And also if tomorrow, or as has already happened, you shut off services and communication, there's a howl going up. So now that's another gap that has to be filled, that our cyber security theory and dialogue has to say that yes, we are looking at C, I and A. We are looking at the data, the service and the connectivity. And we are looking at what we have today and how fast we might grow tomorrow and what benefit we will get from it. That giant combination would have to be maximized, and only then we would say that okay, fine, that's a good job. Right now that is proving to be hard to tackle. So we are going ahead and taking a spotlight view on some problem and saying, okay, right here I will make sure that confidentiality is holding. Right here I'll make sure that I can give a patch update every Tuesday and never mind anything else. Individually those decisions are making sense, but overall the security problem is getting to be very difficult, and that is why not just in India as he brought out, it's a problem that we are all facing. Now that's as far as the growing part of cyberspace is concerned. Now one set of problems occur because of cyber. See, traditionally most of our college and school education is about mass and energy. If you had to ask the random even engineering graduate, what do you know about entropy? They will say, well, okay, maybe second law of thermodynamics, I vaguely remembered something, I just passed it and I don't care. Now, as you get into the cyber world, it is neither the mass or the energy that's your problem. Now we have to come to that information, and the only constraints on it and the laws on it would have to be entropy related. They tell you about what is probable. It is not about possible versus impossible. Violating the law of mass is impossible. Now if your boss comes and says, can you add 2 more functions on this particular application, you can't ever say that no, it is impossible. But the real answer is to say that it is improbable I will get it right within the 2 weeks you are giving me. Now that is not something that our school system has conditioned us to either say as a junior or accept as a senior. So anything to do with these information processing, the complexity of it is not going to get managed very well. And that is why you had, the IEEE magazine saying, oh, 75% of software projects have collapsed in the 80s and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily that much better now. Also, your ownership models need a rethink. When we look at physical ownership, I have bought a car, now you take it away from me, why is it considered a crime? Is it that, why are you enjoying having a car? Well, it's a bit of a negative view of looking at things. More importantly, if you steal my car, then I don't have my car. So I paid for it and I want to use it. Now, that was the basis of having property rights and such things. It was less to deny another person a benefit. It was more to make sure the person paid for it gets the benefit. Now, in the information world, nobody is necessarily taking anything away from someone. You had something, I made a bitwise copy of it. You are still in possession of your bitwise copy. So when you start making laws, so you can't use that. The next question comes that you can make a law if you can say that it's going to induce good behavior. In other words, it's going to induce people to do things where everybody will benefit in the end. To that extent, you have an IPR and a patenting system to incentivize people to do something. But the distinction has to be kept in mind that you cannot invoke the physical world law of taking something away and calling it theft just because I'm not having it anymore. We are breaching those things and going and howling and asking for laws to be made in any case. Lastly, how do consumers react to cybersecurity? See, you don't have a command control sequence as in the military to dictate anything to the consumer. They are making their own choices. If they are going to be making their own choices, there has to be a basis on which they will make those choices. So most of them will use, and the way human logic works and brain works, they'll use Bayesian inferencing, that they will say, okay, this is what I think will happen if I do this, this is what will happen there, so I will make some choice. Fine, the Bayesian estimator may be optimal, but it's critically dependent on priors. So now the priors have to be in place correctly if you are expecting a mass set of individual decisions to be correct. Priors take a time to be created in society. Now the rate at which these priors are shifting because of technology development is simply not being kept up with the population in general. So a lot of the problems that you are facing in terms of cyber security is because people have not realized what can and cannot happen. Two things can happen. Let's say you take something like identity, privacy, authentication, so on and so forth. First of all, in theory, an identifier should never be secret in the first place. That secrecy is not the security property of an identifier. It is supposed to be unique two ways. That if I have an identifier and somebody else has an identifier, these two can't collide. In that case, it's a break of the security property. It cannot be that I managed to get two if I'm supposed to have only one. Then you would want that identifier should be verifiable. Now, if you can't have a direct verification, you might go for an authentication like a PIN or a password and something else. But primarily it should have been a verifiable identifier. Now, everyone is not hep to all these subtleties of the security theory underlying all of this. All of a sudden they have been given something. Now, they will internalize, oh, there are things in my life called large number sequences. Now, one of that large number sequences may have been an 8-digit PIN. Another thing may have been a cell phone number. Something else may have been your Aadhaar or your passport number. Now, either they believe everything has to be kept secret or they will believe that anything can be given to anybody over the phone. Either ways, we are in trouble. So, these are educational issues perhaps, but nevertheless, it is something that we have to figure out a way of actually educating our public. Partly it happens when you read newspaper reports and you see, oh, this happened, that happened, and you say, okay, so I should be a bit more careful. Then you watch some serials and all and find nowadays serials are being made, being streamed to everybody about how some racket is going on and everybody is cleaning up everybody's bank accounts. Good. At least then people will learn something or the other, and that's good. And lastly, when you have this cyber technologies explode all over the place, we are in effect increasing the empowerment to human beings. Everybody is very happy getting empowered themselves. But people always have a problem with the other person also getting empowered. And it is that differential in accepting which causes a lot of unnecessary concerns. Okay. So I was in the US, for example, when this cell phone and caller line identification suddenly became technically feasible. Now what happens? It's now possible for me as an incoming person picking up the thing to see who's calling me. And there was a hue and cry that this is going to violate privacy. Now, it changes the odds of certain behaviors, true. But on the other hand, you always had a peeping hole in your door to see who's coming and calling. So you can't say that the person is supposed to open the door without seeing who's coming knocking on the door. So why inflict that on the telephone receiver? So eventually caller line identification went through because some people went and said is no, previously I could have been on the beach and told my boss I'm at work, now you are taking away that thing. Now that amounts to saying that I have a right to lie. No judicial system will sanction a right to lie, otherwise they will go out of business. So many of these situations will show up, and you need to be very careful in coming up with security theories which are solving real problems. It cannot be that Humans have an expectation and therefore you suddenly go ahead and do something. So just to end, before we started, somebody came and asked for an authorization. Oh, we are sending, we are going to distribute it internally, distribute it publicly. I'm touched. But the question I have is this: did anybody give it to me in writing that they are going to keep their eyes open while I'm giving the talk? That you just assumed. You are going to take notes when I'm giving the talk? That you just assumed. So in what way would it be different if you turned on your Apple phone and took a video of me? So the only thing is, I am not yet used to the fact that an individual human has been authorized to have such perfect recording of an event. Other than that, what? I came here on my choice. Fine, I signed it off and I told them, yes, go ahead. But see, these are the kinds of phony problems that might come up when there is a sudden huge change in technology and consequent empowerment, both in terms of the individual and the organizations and the governments. And last but not the least, when it comes to this government business, see, all security problems require a boundedness for it to be well defined. There has to be some administrator, some person holding some property constant. Now, you may choose to make it the government, you may choose to make it somebody other than the government. But eventually that dependence is not something that can be said can be made to go away. If you want to make it go away, then you would have to take recourse to a physical property of the universe to get your security, in which case the costs end up being very high. So those of you who might be familiar with something called the pioneer process of Professor Perig, he tried to actually use timing measurements to ensure that somebody was doing an honest computation and not doing something behind their backs. And if you actually follow it, the excruciating details to which you have to go to derive that kind of a security and make it foolproof is tremendous. So most of the time, there will be somebody maintaining the peace. Now, either it is somebody controllable by money as in a company, or it might be somebody controllable by votes as in the government, or it might be somebody as a social circle controllable by a shared objective and utility. So this framing of the security problem such that society people don't end up misinterpreting what is the promise or what is the danger is something that we have to be worried about as professionals. Because right now that is not necessarily happening. And sometimes they will underestimate what the threat is, sometimes they will overestimate what the protection promises. And if that is going to be the case, then we would have been guilty of having created a world that nobody wanted, nobody asked for it, but we went ahead and created a modern cell phone camera with power of God given to everybody, and now we are saying, oh my God, everybody is listening, everybody is hearing, whatever it is. So some of these loops will take time to converge. In the meantime, we are of course trying to do the best we can, get all the resources in the country, and you would have seen there was something about security, strengthening and synergy. The security part is to think through clearly, saying what should be the objectives and so on and so forth, so that we are doing something that is going to be legally correct, socially acceptable, deliver value, so on and so forth. In order to be able to run that system, you would need to strengthen institutions, strengthen legal systems, frameworks, regulatory mechanisms. A huge amount of training has to happen. But at the bottom, if it comes to actually delivering on that promise, there's a huge amount of construction which has to happen in the ICT space. And that's where the synergy has to come in, because ultimately the industry, academia and the civilian population have to both create those solutions, evaluate those solutions, use those solutions. Partly it might be a regulatory incentivization and a disincentivization. Largely it will have to be financial, because unless something is financially found to be viable, it is not going to be sustainable. So, people would have to pay for security. People will pay for security if they are given a guarantee and an assurance with respect to that. There might even be negative incentives saying that if this is it, then so and so is liable for it. Which brings us to other uncomfortable questions, that cyber products today are an uncontrolled product. Do you want a regulatory authority which goes and says who can and cannot do something? It's not a far-fetched question. Take what has happened in the transport sector. Just because you have the money to buy a car doesn't mean you go drive it and crash and kill somebody. You need to have a license. So there's a licensing mechanism. There is a safety of the car that is being done. it is for benefit of everybody that whoever wants to drive a vehicle has to go for a licensing, and then we take exception saying, okay, fine, bicycles or anything less than that is exempted from it because they can't crash and hurt anybody. So even questions of that sort, saying that if every cyber entity in the nation is going to be a springboard for an attack on some other cyber entity in the nation and so on and so forth, then who is to go ahead and put it? These are very debatable issues, because as I said, each of these so-called security moves would have a huge negative impact with respect to growth and utility. Why are people still using these things even though they think they are unsafe? At the end of it, during installation, most of us will say, I agree. And that I agree is to the fact that no matter what happens, huge organizations are not liable. But we are not crazy to be doing so. We do it for a good reason. Because our perception is, on the whole, we will be better off using that product than not using the product. And that decision is being left to individuals. So these are some of the nuances which have to be worked out. Cryptography part, as I said, is in good shape. The overall analysis and payoffs and game theoretic evaluation, much more needs to be done. Getting into the fundamentals of whether you can use mass energy concepts for ownership of information, anybody's guess. Then ownership of information, should it be based on content? Who paid the cost of creating it? Who's liable for the usage of it? See, none of these have been settled in debate. So to expect a policy to go and sort it out now is a bit premature, is my feeling. But however, we need to get started. We can't keep not taking action for a long period of time. Hence this business of asking for comments and you send comments, I send comments, finally he decides what to do. That's a different issue. But that's where we are. And yes, we are alive to the risks, we are alive to the thing. We are also alive to the opportunities. That information theory and this ICT revolution is something we should participate in. That's where it is.
So thank you. So I think that's been quite a large number of points of view which are very interesting. So so rather than my waste any more time by asking questions, I think it's best to, I think a lot of the things have been brought out. So I think, okay, just to summarize a few of the things that have been brought out, I think one is that, which is very apt, is that one is technology moves faster than policy in some sense. So it's very hard for policy to keep up with technology because we don't even understand what we are doing most of the time. The other thing is that we don't understand policy, which is also brought out. The theory of policy making, I think, is not, at least in general, I would say, not just in cyber security policy, but what are the implications of making policy decisions? What are the positive and negative aspects? How does it affect people? There are all these questions to do with privacy versus denial of service and all these things. So I think there are many aspects which have been brought out. Plus, of course, the fact that there is this human aspect. That we are not training the people who are supposed to enforce these policies. We are not training them in the right way. We are using some outmoded notions of what they should be checking for. So I think these are all some of the broad parameters which are there. Now I'm sure that, as I said at the beginning, and I warned them that everybody will have a question or an opinion. So there must be a few questions. So we have some time, maybe about 15 minutes to have your questions. So there are mics. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll make sure that somebody reaches you.
Yeah, just make sure this is running out of time. Keep the questions pointed and
Yeah. So by the way, so I just did this last week with a Nobel Prize winner with a hall of 700 people. You ask a question and you give the mic back. No dialogues. So
what is your approach in collaborating with foreign government security agencies that are facing similar problems and making similar cybersecurity investments?
So addressing it to anybody? Yeah. Okay. No. Yeah. No, we are open to working with anybody. See, one thing is recognize that expertise per se does not exist only in the government. We and understand there's a lot of expertise outside. I'm talking within the country first before I come to your thing. There's expertise outside the government, and that's why we have lots of this partnerships that we have in the private sector for especially in the cybersecurity area. I'm coming from from Hyderabad. where we had this day before yesterday, a launch of the Center of Excellence for Cybersecurity, which was done by the Telangana state government. And that is, if you look at the charter that they have built, and it's funded by the government, but that's the only thing they're doing. The other thing is the center has complete independence to engage with the private sector, to encourage startups to come up with products in the cybersecurity space. That's one. So, and similar center of excellence is being is going to get inaugurated in Noida also, and we are going ahead and asking that such centers of excellence where we have industry, academia, and the user groups and the government come together to come up with cybersecurity solutions, and we are encouraging all the states to come up with such infrastructure in place so that we have a good ecosystem and lots of companies. There are only around 175 cybersecurity firms in the country now. We want to really ramp it up. Coming to international cooperation, one is in talking terms of with other governments. We have bilateral, it's a regular basis, we have bilateral dialogues with different countries where we talk about what are the areas in which we can cooperate with them and how we can get our companies and their companies to work together. Just on December 17th, we had bilateral with Israel, where the Israel delegation, the executive director of the INCD, Israel National Cybersecurity Directorate, had come along with a host of companies which are in the cybersecurity space, and we had Indian companies together to discuss about how they could collaborate. And we had some picked up companies which actually gave a presentation to us about the products that they use, which could be used both within the government and the private sector. So, these are some things we are open to, and then we have formal MOUs also that we have signed with, for example, with USA we have got, with Russia we have got, with Israel we have got, with France we have got. One is the cert-to-cert cooperation for exchange of threat intelligence, that is one part, and the other is in R&D and capacity building. Mainly these are the two areas where we talk about that. We are open to all of that.
Thank you.
Of course, and also we also participate in multilateral forums, like we have this for the norms of behavior in the cyberspace. We have the GG, the government group of experts, the new GG, that the 6th GG that's been formed. So, where we participate, and another the open-ended working group also that's been created, where we have meetings in February now for both the GG and the OEWG. So, we will have an Indian delegation that's going ahead and participating in that, and where we are evolving the norms for behavior in cyberspace.
So this is a question for Mr. Nath. You said a lot about, or you said stuff about countries of concern and protecting our infrastructure, and so you have Geo here, which is connected to 100 million people over the infrastructure. They are making decisions about who's going to manage the infrastructure. What is your opinion about Huawei?
See, the current regulatory framework that we have in the country, it says that, like for example, every sector has got its own regulatory framework, and I originally belong to the telecom sector, the licensing conditions. They give the service providers the complete independence to make techno-commercial decisions for their putting network equipment into place. Having said that, if you look at the licensing, the security chapter of the licensing condition states that the service providers responsible for the security of the networks, and there are some penal clauses that seek to address that thing for the enforceability part of it. For example, a breach where the due diligence has not been exercised, for each breach they are liable for a penalty of 50 crore rupees. So, that's why though they are told that they are responsible for that, we expect them to take all the necessary measures for the ICA part of it, integrity of the communication, the availability of the communication. So, they are responsible for all of that. So, that itself is a proper incentive for people to take necessary measures to see that proper equipment is put in place. As I said, just by ensuring that we have an equipment from countries of concern, let's say for example, does not give you security. So, it's much more than that. So, that's a debate that's happening across the world. It's not that we had this debate about equipment coming from today. You go back to the 2010 or 2005 and all, this debate has been happening at that time also about how to actually take care of this situation. You must be knowing about the decision that's been taken by UK a couple of days back. So, it's something, I mean, it's a time.
about giving the private sector, which can make trade-off between people being putting on the amount of money they would save by going to a certain vendor in the government, which actually pays for the national.
It's only 50 crores per instance, isn't it? So, for example, if you have, there are some 25 licenses across each state is a licensee. So, you just have to multiply 50 into 25 for the penalty. For example, when you have the CAF verification, so it was only 50 crores when they didn't verify the customer's application form, it is 50 crores. The actually penalty that came to is around 1050 crores per operator. When they didn't verify, the customers before onboarding a customer, you have the, so it comes down to that. So, the penalties are really hefty. It's not that, for instance, it is.
So I think this is
Sriram has a question at the back.
Yeah. So does misinformation, does that come under the purview of the National Security Council? If somebody
Misinformation. Spreading
willfully spreads
misinformation.
misinformation, or if that is not within the purview, whose purview is it?
See, when you talk of misinformation, there are different platforms through which misinformation could come. It's not misinformation has come after cyberspace has come. Misinformation has been there since ages, and we have a legal framework. The Indian Penal Code is there, and the Criminal Procedure Code is there, which have provisions for dealing with misinformation, and those are applicable even if whether you do misinformation through other media or through the media of cyberspace. So there are provisions available. The only thing is the acceleration and the multiplication that happens with the cyberspace is an area of concern, and maybe down the line you would think of having what are the measures and whether maybe there should be a difference that you should have in the penal provisions regarding misinformation. Yes, we do have provisions in the existing Criminal Procedure Code and the Indian Penal Code. We have provisions regarding misinformation.
See, the other thing is that typically, as far as a technology solution is concerned, it is not the content of the data which can be so easily fixed by a technology solution. So, the most you can do is do all the other stuff around it, saying that can I make it verifiable where that information came from and such things. So, you might improve the attribution, and then it is always left to a human being's judgment to do the interpretation on the data. I mean, the same thing happens in military context also. I mean, someone has moved a few dummy tanks and generated an image, and therefore based on that you made a wrong decision. That will not be counted as a cybersecurity incident. See, if someone directly breaks into the server and alters the data, that's a different issue. But if someone has played with the commander's mind by creating something or the other, that's where I was saying ultimately human beings will use Bayesian logic. There's a prior that they are having. So, the first time around you might say that everybody assumed that every handle on Twitter and Facebook was genuine and believed. Fine, couple of elections might get contested, lot of hue and cry is made. Eventually we'll come to an equilibrium point where people will start figuring out that yes, this is not such a reliable source of information, or I need to cross check it, so on and so forth. But one has to be careful, because if you start demanding that there be an absolute verification, then every sovereign state will put such a filter on actually doing that checking and so on and so forth that we would have killed off the medium of a social media. At that point we have to take a call whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Technically could it be done is one question. Whether as a society that's the path we want to go down is a second question. So very often the technical solutions might limit what you might want to decide as a society, but sometimes they may not, and it is just the decision which might be taking a while to firm up.
Regarding the misinformation, the government is engaging with the service providers, social media service providers, for handling this issue of misinformation, and they pointed out attribution. So, for example, with WhatsApp, we went in and talked about how to, the forwards keep on happening. How do you trace it to the original person who has originated that? There are certain things. Even the courts are seized of the matter, and it's in the courts now regarding that. So yeah, it's important actually. We have to have a technical solution.
And the footnote to that is we are damned if we do and we are damned if we don't.
So the question here from Kapil.
Yeah. So the recent PDP bill makes some interesting, potentially worrisome discussion around surveillance and the government's role in that space. So do you have some thoughts on how as a society we should be viewing that problem and our trust in systems?
Regarding the PDB bill, if you look at the privacy debate and all, it's not that we don't have a legal framework or a regulatory framework regarding privacy. It's that the PDB bill is trying to consolidate it across all sectors so that we have one uniform parameter, common denominator that's applicable. Like for example, in the banking sector, they have their own regulations regarding how the customers' data is to be protected. It's not that they don't have a framework. Similar in the telecom sector also, where we have this calling data and all of that. They have regulations which says that the data cannot go out of the country. All the personal data that belongs to the country, you're talking about it, that's already existing. So no operator, for example, I was there in the sector. So like for example, one of the operators came and said, we process because we are a multinational company. So we would like to take the data because we have one vendor who actually processes our global data, and then we use it for billing and other purposes. No, they were not provided they were not allowed to take the data out. So they had to put all the processing facilities within the country for processing the data. So respective sectors have, as I said, different maturity models, and there is a process in place that they had that. Now this PDB bill is trying to have a uniform framework. Now coming to the surveillance part of it, it's like, for example, if you have a lawful interception, that's not surveillance. If you're talking of lawful interception, are you talking lawful interception?
The question is more around what the law is enabling going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it is related to what the government can and cannot ask private enterprises to do.
Okay. See, even now, for law enforcement purposes, we have a framework for information to be asked for. We have a mechanism through which information can be sought for law enforcement purposes. So, yeah, I mean, we should see it's like this. Like right to life, it's a fundamental right. But then we are going to hang some 4 people. So, but then it means what? We have a lawful process through which we have gone through that, and we are going to, now their right to life has been abrogated because of certain issues. Similarly, the right to privacy also is circumscribed by certain law, which says that for these purposes, legitimate purpose, I am going to pick up this information and use it. Now, we had this, infamous Hyderabad case near the airport where that girl was, killed. Now, somebody's privacy was intruded because there was some CCTV camera that captured that person's image as he was purchasing something, and that's how those 4 people were caught. Now, so when you look at it, the right to privacy is circumscribed by a duly legal process which says that certain information can be sought for lawful purposes. So that I think the PDB bill also, when it finally comes out, would actually have provisions which would look at it a lawful process by which information can be sought for law enforcement purposes. That's how I look at it. See, is that what you're looking at? Yeah, so then if you have a misuse, then you have a legal provision. For example, a person misuses it, then the law will take care of it. See, what is a misuse? Misuse is that you said this is a proper use and this is a misuse. So if somebody doesn't do a proper use and then does a misuse, then everywhere you have these provisions that if something is misused, then he's like, for example, currently also in the telecom sector, because we have the lawful interception is from the telecom sector, you pick up, the law enforcement is allowed. There, for example, if that information that is sought is actually, that process is misused by any government employee, he is liable for 3 years imprisonment. So we have a provision that if it doesn't go through a law, if a misuse of that provision is done, then there are consequences that are there, that has to be faced. So we have to build mechanisms and structures in place to see that a law is established and the law is properly followed. And if there is a violation of the law, then appropriate consequences are there. So that
I'll just add something. See, there's a difference between a fundamental right and a contract enforcement. So you can always have 2 people coming to an understanding that it is with this understanding that we are doing this. And if one of them should violate it under enforcing a contract, you can penalize that person. See, when it comes to a right, I mean, without getting carried away by the fashionableness of it all, see, a right must have certain fundamental properties too, that they are meant to be empowering an individual to do something that that individual could have done in any case. It is not the thing that a right gives you an ability to go and dictate something to somebody else. So as he said, right to life, it means that I can stay alive, I stay alive. You can't come and kill me. It doesn't follow that if I'm on my deathbed, I invoke right to life and demand the government make me immortal. So the issue is when it comes to privacy, anything where you are saying that I don't want to be put in jail because I refuse to disclose information can be defended as a right to privacy. But if you are saying that I have gone ahead and disclosed something to somebody, but the subsequent usage of it, that has to come under a contract, not a right. Because if it is a right you are looking at, you can't invoke a right for enforcing third-party inefficiencies and ignorance. So I have told you, like say we were talking about these encounters, so let's say I have told you that I am so and so. Now, do I have a right to prevent you from telling Satyalokam what I told you? Now, at that point, I can assert that right if I completely violate your right and I am intruding on your conversation with your neighbor. So many of these things would be on pretty tricky grounds if you really think it through logically to say that can it be made into a right. On the other hand, it can always be made into a contract enforcement paradigm. So therefore, the number of rights you have is very few. See, your penal code is much bigger and your contract management is much bigger. So under that condition, you go and sue Zuckerberg, that's a different matter. But to use rights is a very different matter. And hence I was alluding to this, that also there is a question of ownership. We are rushing ahead and assuming that content is king. That if it is my photo, I own it. It does not have to go that way. See, ultimately there is a currency note with Gandhiji's photo on it. Doesn't mean that all the currency belongs to his living descendant. No. You take a satellite image of India. Does it mean that image belongs to India? No. So I go and take a picture of a beautiful building. Now who's supposed to be the owner of that picture? I took it because it's on my camera. That is one way of looking at it. The architect says I created it. The residents say we are living in it. The workers say we put the bricks together. So if you are going to make content-based ownership of data, it's an unsettled issue. Because of certain prior expectations, because of certain comfort levels, we may all agree to have a certain way of doing things. That is the agreed code of conduct kind of pathway to making a law. It is not necessarily the legal physical basis of making a law. And in any case, you have to make sure in that case, if you did it for convenience basis, that there is a convenience, there is a freedom from contradiction, and it will not subsequently lead to behavior patterns which are going to be detrimental to social good. So none of that is all that settled. So it might well be that 50 years later, Zuckerberg versus European Commission is seen in the same way as Galileo versus the Pope. Keep your fingers crossed.
See, we are talking only of personal data. The bigger issue that will come out is non-personal data. I mean, this is only personal data, Bill. The anonymous data, and other than lots of other data like IoT devices is going to generate such an amount of data. Now, how do you use it for public good, for example? So, does the government have a right to ask for that information? Because lots of private enterprises, like I deploy some equipment across, I might be collecting a lot of pollution data, and does the government have a right to ask for the data for public good, for using it for public good? How do I share it with academic institutions, for example, to do research? So these are, I think, these are some things that you'll have to sit together, put your heads together to see that how do we actually use this data for public good or for commercial purposes, and what's the life cycle of that whole thing. So these are things that require.
Last word. So anyway, so I mean the last word is, yes, I'd like to thank you both. It's been a very informative and very, I think, engaging session, and I'd like to thank the questions from the audience and all of you, and I guess we get to go for lunch now, right?
Yeah, before we go for lunch, a quick note of thanks. Thank you so much. Yeah, please give a big round of applause for the panelists for the interview.